Hello, so the Godot animation player may be the most powerful node in Godot. It has the ability to not just create animations and effects, but also to control entire game features. It is one of those nodes which you simply can't go without once you begin using it. So I thought it would be so beneficial to create an entire tutorial on it today. We will start this tutorial with a complete walkthrough of the animation player UI and then head directly into a 1-hour hands-on animation player walkthrough, in which we will turn this simple project into this using only the animation player. So a lot of information has been jammed into this tutorial with the goal of explaining all the fundamentals and the important features of the Godot animation player. Subscribe to help other aspiring game developers, and if you come across an issue or need further clarification on something, feel free to let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to get back to you. But with that being said, let's start by taking a brief look at the Godot animation player and understand the UI which we will be working with today. To create a new animation, we can click the animation button and hit new. Then we can give it a name. Using the animation tab, you can rename, copy, delete, along with saving and loading individual animations in terms of a resource. You can also duplicate, rename, or delete the current animations within this menu here. And the edit transition tab allows you to set blend times for each animation. You can change the current animation displayed in the timeline using this drop-down menu here. The timeline uses tracks and keyframes to animate nodes. For example, if we click add track, there are many types of tracks. One which you can call methods, one specific for audio management, and most importantly the property track, which allows us to choose any inspector property of a node that we want to adjust the value of throughout an animation. And to adjust the value throughout the animation, we use keyframes. We can right click anywhere within a track to set a keyframe, and then within the inspector we can set the value for that keyframe. The transition between keyframe values can be done either smoothly or instantly using the update property. Then next to that you have some interpolation options along with track specific looping options, which we will talk more about later. As for the more broad animation options, you have the animation duration, which can be changed from seconds to FPS. You can also toggle snapping, which will snap keyframes at set increments within the timeline, and we can also enable snapping for our current position line using this button here. The options to the left just adjust how the tracks and keyframes are displayed. Then back up here we have the option to play our animation on autoload, toggle onion skin, and select different options for our onion skin. Here you can change the animation loop from non-looping to looping and then to a back and forth loop. And the edit tab here gives us a few more options like duplicating entire tracks and so on. But that covers the major components of the animation player, and again we'll go through these features so much more when we're working with them hands-on throughout this tutorial. And since we are now hopefully a little more familiarized with the animation player, let's move into a tutorial section and turn this project here into this using only the animation player. Okay, so to best explain the animation player here in Godot, I have created a tutorial project that we're going to walk through step by step, adding in animation players throughout it and creating kind of what we see on screen right now. But here's the project that we have at the very beginning of all of this, right? So before we have any animation player, we basically have a player here who has no animations. And then we have a world over here which has, again, no animations. Our player doesn't have any health. We don't deal damage, none of it, right? No UI. The only logic in this game that we have is player movement. And if you look down here in the output, you can see that we are in the fire world. And then we go over to the normal world and then back to the fire, basically whenever we cross this line here. And that is done with 2 collision shapes. But where I'm getting at is that this tutorial project that you see right here, which is the before project, you can download for completely free from itch.io, which I'll link down below. And then you can also download the completely finished project, which we're going to get to at the end of this tutorial. And you can download that as well to kind of walk through and see what we did, how we did it. If you're having trouble anywhere, you can look at that, or you can ask me down in the comments down below, and I will be sure to get back to you and answer any questions, whether they're simple or very, very complex. I'll do my best to answer everything. Okay, so let's real quickly walk through what we have in our before project so that we actually know what we're working with as we go through this tutorial. So in our world scene, we have a color rect as the background color, which is called our void color. We have particle system, which is a CPU particle 2D, and that's basically creating these particles that you see right here within our fire area. Then we have a tile map layer, which kind of creates this platform that you see. And then we have a player, which our player is very, very simple. We have a animated sprite, which is just basically making 2 different frames, right? A base frame, which we're later going to animate farther to create different animations, like a walk animation and idle animation. And then, but we're going to do that through an animation player, which we'll go over a little bit later. And then we also have our hurt frame, which again, we're going to animate farther with an animation player. Then we have a collision shape 2D for our player collision and a camera 2D there as well. And then back in our world, we have a node which is called environmental zones, which basically is all the logic for the two zones that we have here. We have two area 2Ds which are making these zones, right? So this is our world zone, which is in our world area 2D, and our fire zone, which is in our fire area 2D. And then within our environmental zone script, you can kind of see the logic that is allowing this to happen. We define an entity group for our player, which is basically our player is in a group named player. And then we basically check for overlapping bodies. And if the overlapping body in that area 2D is the player, then we know that the player is in that area 2D. So then we know what area the player is actually in, right? And then we're going to base our animations and stuff like that off this logic. But again, it's right here, and it is in the before project if you do download that from itch to follow along. Then we also have this animation color correct here, which right now is transparent, but if we don't make it as transparent, you can kind of see that it's basically just an overlay of like kind of like a atmosphere in front of our player, in front of our scene. So this is kind of like a atmosphere color because it's in front of the player, and then this is our void color because it's basically the background color, if that makes sense. But right now this is set to invisible because we are in our world and we don't really need any sort of haze or anything, right? But again, we'll go over this later when we get to animating the environment or the scene animations and making scene effects. And then we have a canvas layer down here, which is called user interface, which stores our user interface scene. But our user interface scene currently has absolutely nothing within it because, again, we're going to go over that later. Okay, so with all that being said, we can head over to our player scene and start creating our player animations. So to do that, we have to have an animation player. So we can add that to our player scene. And the next step is, we have to have a timeline that we can work within to actually keyframe values and create an animation. So to do that, we have to create an animation within our animation player. And if you recall back to the beginning of this tutorial, if you do remember how to do that, then create an animation with the name walk. If you don't remember how to do that, this is how we do it. We hit this animation button, we hit new, then we can name our animation. In this case, we'll name it walk, and then we'll hit OK. And then we'll have a brand new timeline down here that we can work within. Now, our timeline has no tracks, right? And what a track is maybe it's a specific property that we're animating. Well, if we have no tracks, then we can't animate anything. So we need to add a track of a value that we need to animate. Let's think about this for a minute for a walk animation. In a walk animation, or I guess in the walk animation that we're going to be creating right now, we're just going to change the rotation a little bit to kind of create a walk effect. So to do that, we need to add a property track of our animated sprite 2D of the rotation property, right? So our animated sprite 2D has the rotation property down here, so we can add that as a track within our animation player and kind of change it and create it to be kind of animated, right? So we can hit animation player, hit add track, hit add property track, a property of our animated sprite 2D, and the property that we're going to be changing is going to be the rotation property. So now that we have our rotation track down here, we can start adding rotation keyframes, which are going to change the value of our rotation throughout our animation. Maybe at the very beginning of our walk animation, we want our rotation to be equal to 0. So we can insert a keyframe, and we can set the value of this keyframe to equal to 0, right? And then we can move this keyframe to 0, 0 right here. So whenever we first call this animation, our rotation is going to be equal to 0. Maybe whenever we get to the 10th of a second point, we want to change our rotation. But by how much do we want to change our rotation? Well, there's another way to actually add keyframes, and we're going to go over that now. So let's say we want to end up having a keyframe at 0.1. We can move our little pointer to 0.1. We can go to our animated sprite. We can look at the rotation here, and we can change around the rotation. Maybe let's see -5. It's not too much and it's not too little, so that might be good. We can try that out. If we click on the animation tab down here at the bottom, you're going to see that you're going to have all these keys pop up next to every property. We can add a key of rotation directly into that animation by just clicking this key. And you're going to see that that's going to add a keyframe right there at 0.1, and it's going to have the value of whatever the value over here is, which is -5, and it's going to store that -5 value. So now if we play this animation, you're going to see what happens. We have a slight rotation there, right? Which is good. That's exactly what we want. And one more thing that I want to go over real quickly while we're at it is that this line over here is our update mode. So right now you can kind of see that it has a smooth transition between the two values. If we change this to discrete, then you're going to see that it's not going to have a smooth transition, but instead change exactly when it hits that keyframe, which again is useful in some situations, but for most animations I feel like that's not too useful. So we're going to leave it at continuous so that it kind of looks more smooth. Now let's say that we want to maybe at 0.02 go back to 0, right? So whoops, let's go to 0.2, so 20th of a second. We want our rotation to go back to 0. Well, we already know the value that we want, so we can end up just adding in a keyframe like this and hitting 0 just like that, right? So now you're going to see what happens there. Well, we're going to rotate, and then we're going to rotate back to 0. And then maybe that's like we took a step forward, but now if you think about walking, you have that back leg that needs to come up and around. So maybe we can change our rotation to +5 here at 0.3, which is going to be the opposite of what we did at 0.1, just to kind of make everything symmetrical. And then maybe at 0.4 we can hit it back to 0, right? So every 10th of a second we're changing our rotation by 5 to create that, right? So it's kind of like what we bring our front leg over, we put it down, and then that back leg follows just like that. And it kind of looks like a sort of walking animation. And we did that by just changing our rotation. So you can kind of see how our rotation is changing depending on these keyframes here. Now, of course, if we play this animation, well, a walking animation, we want it to, first of all, loop. So we can come over here and hit this loop button. If we click play again, you're going to see that, well, we have a lot of this dead space over here. So to get rid of that, well, we can just change the duration of our animation to where our last keyframe is, which is 0.4. So we can set this over here to 0.4. And now if we were to play this animation and have it loop, you're going to see that it kind of looks like our player is, I guess, wiggling across the ground, or in this case, walking, right? Which that looks good. And that's all being done by just changing the rotation of our player. If we go and we look at our animated sprite and we look at the rotation value right here, as our animation plays, you can kind of see what's happening. You can kind of see how it is changing back and back and forth and back and forth. Now, of course, it doesn't look too smooth, but that's just because it's not updating so quickly, right? It's maybe updating every whatever a second. But you can see that if we do it slower, you can kind of see that it is every 0.1 degree, just like that. And you can kind of see how it's going and how it does that smoothly to create this animation. Now, one more thing I want to go over about our walk animation is that maybe if we were in our hurt state and we played a hurt animation, then our animated sprite, the animation that's going to be playing, is our hurt animation. If we go to our animation player and we play this, well, that's going to look silly, right? That's not how we want to be walking. We want to make sure that our player is actually in its base state. So to do that, well, we can do a property track. We can add track, property track of our animated sprite, and we can do the animation property here. We can throw in a keyframe, set the value of this keyframe to the base, and then we can move that to the very, very beginning. So basically, no matter what our animated sprite is equal to, we're going to equal it to the base frame before we start playing our walk, because that's the frame that we need to match along with the walk animation, right? So that should complete our walk animation. And I know that we kept it really, really simple, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments at any time. Let's move into creating some sort of little idle animation. So we can click on animation, click new, create our new animation, which is going to be idle. We have to think about what we want to actually happen within our idle animation. So maybe we want our player to kind of take a breath just for a second. Well, again, we're going to be messing with the rotation, so we can add a property track, and get the rotation property for our animated sprite. At the very beginning of our animation, maybe we want our player to be at 0 rotation, so we can keyframe that, right? Maybe when we get down here to like 0.6, like a while into our animation, so our player kind of does nothing for a long time. And maybe when we get here, we can kind of do -1, which kind of makes it look like we're we're inhaling a bunch of air, right? We can keyframe that, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe around 0.8, right? We can just exhale all that air, so we kind of rotate to 1. and then we can kind of see what that looks like there. Kind of looks like, well, if we're at 0 here, we inhale for this entire time, which may be a little odd, so we can throw in a keyframe at 0.5 and set that to 0, and that's going to bring up a new thing, right? It's going to bring up this line here. This line basically means that this keyframe value and this keyframe value are the exact same. So if we run through our idle animation, you can kind of see that nothing happens in this portion. Then we're going to kind of do that rotation, which is our breathing in. Then we're going to kind of go do that rotation of that breathing out. And then as we move to the end, we're still rotated at that one rotation, right? Because there's nothing to change this keyframe value here at the end of our animation. Now, there is an option. Because this is idle and it's going to be a looping animation, we don't actually have to add a 0 keyframe here to basically 0 it back to what it was at the beginning. Because if we hit loop and we play this, you're going to see what happens. We're at 0, we go to -1, we go to 1, and then we go back to 0. Now, why do we just automatically go back to 0 right here after we just turn on looping? Well, that's because of this option right here. So loop wrap mode basically makes it to where if it's a looping animation, then the moment you hit the end keyframe, or I guess the ending keyframe is going to kind of be the same as the very beginning keyframe. And that's just to kind of make it more smooth, because if, for example, we were to turn this off, right? And you would see it would look really, really weird, right? Because it wouldn't be smooth. It'd just be a very direct change. It'd go from 1 and then it'd hit here and then it'd restart and go right back to 0. So it'd make like a little jump there, right? So if it is going to be a looping animation, then you don't really have to worry about adding in a keyframe down here at the end to kind of reset it, because it's going to automatically do that as long as you have the loop, the wrap loop option selected, right? Okay, so that's gonna basically finish up our idle animation, except again, just like we did on the walk animation over here, we want to make sure that we are on our base frame whenever we do play our idle animation. So to do that, we can say, okay, well, property track animated sprite, and that's going to be the animation property. We can add in a keyframe, and we can set that keyframe to equal to base there, just to make sure that we are in our base frame whenever we are playing our idle animation. Okay, so that completes our walk animation and our so there's our walk, right? And then we can switch over to our idle. That looks good. So that completes those two animations. Now let's go and create a quick little animation for if our player is going to be hurt. So we can say, okay, well, animation new. This is going to be our hurt animation. First things first, in our hurt animation, we need to change our frame from the base to the hurt frame. So we can go to our animated sprite here, and we can change our animation to hurt, and click on the animation tab down here at the bottom. We can keyframe hurt right there at 0, 0. Another thing that I want to real quickly do is keyframe rotation at 0, 0. And the reason that we're going to do this is because we have our other animations. We have the walk animation, we have the idle animation, and those animations, they rotate the animated sprite. So if we end up calling our hurt animation right whenever we're in the middle of a rotation, then we're going to play our hurt animation with our animated sprite rotated. So to fix that, we can just set our rotation to 0 at 0, 0 of our hurt, or at 0 seconds of our hurt animation, right? And then the last thing, which is going to kind of make our hurt animation special, is going to be a color flash. We're going to flash our player red. And we can do this by changing the modulate, the property modulate, right? And we can change the value of that. So maybe at the very beginning of our animation, we want it to be default, right? We don't want it just to go strictly to red. Maybe we want it to fade into red. So we can set it to white, and then maybe a little bit into the animation, we can change the color to equal to red. And then we can have it equal red maybe up until like 0.2. And then maybe we want it to fade back out, back to default at 0.3, right? And if we do that, just like so, well, we're going to end up creating a little flash here, which actually looks pretty cool, right? So we're going to fade into red, and then we're going to fade back out of red, kind of creating that like effect. So since our last keyframe is at 0.3, our animation is only going to last about 0.3 seconds. It's not going to be a looping animation because it's going to be called only when our player's hurt, and we don't want it to be playing over and over and over again, because that would be a little bit funny. But what you will see happen is that if we play, we basically just flash our player red. We change our sprite frame to equal to our hurt frame, and then we also make sure our rotation is equal to 0. So if we go to our animation player and we play around with the current animation over here, well, we can play walk. We can see how that works. Then we can hit hurt and see what happens. It'll do that. Now, once we implement this into code, then it'll automatically go back to idle or something else, right? So it's not just going to go to hurt and then be stuck like this. It'll go back to a different animation. And to quickly implement this, we can go into our player script. We can create a new function down here, which is just going to call our animation player to play an animation. So we can say function update animation, and then we can pass through an animation name that we want to play, and then we can say, okay, well, our animation player dot play animation, and then we can call this animation from different parts of our code. So for example, if we're going to want to play our walk, we're going to want to play it whenever we are actually moving, right? So in this section of our code, this is where we are moving. So we can say, okay, well, in this section we want to play walk, right? But basically, if we don't have any direction, that means we're not moving. So if we're not moving, then we want to play our idle animation, just like so. And then that's going to be our walk and idle. So if we go and click play, you're going to see that our player should now play our walk animation. And it's also going to kind of play our idle animation right there as well, which is good. Now we need to implement the hurt animation. And to do this real quickly, we actually need a way for our player to get hurt. And since in our game right now, we don't have a mechanic that tells our player, hey, you just got hurt, we need you to take damage, we're going to implement one of our own for now, just as testing. And we're going to do that with just a button. So if we hit a button, right, and this button that we're going to hit is going to be called test hurt, then it's basically going to just call our hurt function, which we don't have. So we'll create one, but it'll be process hurt, and then we'll process some sort of damage amount, right? So if we hit this button, then we're just going to test out our damage. It's going to basically be like our player is taking damage, but by the end of this tutorial, we will remove that when we actually have a way for our player to take damage, which is going to be done through the fire environment animation. So we can create this function, and we need to pass through damage there. And within a damage function, we're going to keep it pretty simple. We're just going to say, okay, well, health is going to minus equal the damage, which is going to subtract damage from our health. And then we're also going to update the animation to equal, update the animation to equal to the hurt animation, right? Now, this looks like, well, it should work, because when we're moving, we call walk. When we're not moving, we call idle. And when we're processing damage, we call hurt. But you're going to see that we're actually never going to end up calling our hurt animation. So if we run around and we click H, nothing actually happens. And well, why is that? Well, because up here we call process damage, and then right after that we end up calling movement. So we do set it to hurt, but then right after we set it to hurt, we end up calling this and setting it to either walk or idle based on our direction. So to kind of go around that, we can create sort of a checkpoint variable by coming up here and creating a variable called is taking damage. And this is going to be a Boolean variable, and it's going to be equal to true when we're taking damage, and it's going to be equal to false when we're not taking damage. So when are we taking damage? Well, we're taking damage whenever we are processing damage. So we can set that variable equal to true down here. And then what this is going to mean is that we can decide when movement is called, and we can decide when all this code is ran, and we only want this code to be ran when we're not taking damage, right? Because if we are taking damage, well, we want to prioritize our hurt animation, and we want to prioritize taking damage over being able to move around, right? So we can come up here and we can say, okay, well, if we're not taking damage, then we can end up calling movement here. And then else, which means we would be taking damage, we can just make sure our velocity is set to 0. And that's going to allow our player to just come to a stop and play its hurt animation, process its hurt, and then move on just with normal function. But actually right now we're not going to be moving on with normal function. But if we do play, you'll see that we can run around, we can click H, and we take hurt, but we never go back into our normal function. And the reason that is because, well, our checkpoint variable, we never change it back to false anywhere. We only change it to true, but we never change it to false. So the way that we can go around this is, well, talking about a new animation player feature, which is, I mean, it's not new, but it's something that we haven't went over today in today's tutorial yet. but it's signals. And the animation player has a ton of signals, which are, extremely useful in a lot of cases, like the one that we're about to be working with here. But if we come over and click on our animation and then we come over to node, you can see that these are all the signals associated with the animation player. Today we're going to be using animation finished. Basically what that does is it's going to signal to the script whenever an animation finishes, and it's going to pass through the name of the animation that finished, which is really useful, right? So we can check, well, if the hurt animation finished, then we can set the is taking damage variable to false, which is perfect for what we're doing. But yeah, if you want to look into these other signals, I really recommend it. Remember, if you don't understand signals completely, be sure to look into why signals work, how they work, because it's not just an animation player thing, it's an entire Godot feature. And it's extremely useful. It's one of those things that makes Godot so special. But for example, if you understand how signals work, but you don't know exactly what a certain signal does, remember that you always have the search help up here and you can look them up. For example, let's say we want to figure out what does animation changed do. Right, well, we can say, okay, well, it's under the animation player category, so we can search help animation player. We can go up here into signals, and we can say, okay, well, here's the signal, animation changed. Okay, so it's going to pass through our old animation and our new animation. So we can kind of see, okay, so it changed from this to this, which, okay, that could be useful in the situation that we're working in, or maybe it won't be useful in the situation that you're working in. But remember, you can always search up what the animations do to kind of help you and get you on the right track. But again, today we're going to end up using animation finished because it's going to be perfect for what we're doing. So if we hit this twice, we can send this signal to our player and we can connect it just like that. And it's going to create a function down here for us. Now what we're going to do in this function is, well, we're going to check the name, because this name is going to be whatever animation just finished. So basically, if the animation name is equal to hurt, meaning our hurt animation just completed, then we know that, well, we need to say, okay, we're not taking damage anymore because we just finished our animation. We took damage, we played our animation, and well, now we need to go back to idle, or we need to go back to walking so that our player can have control back over the character. So we can say, okay, well, is taking damage equals to false, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to call movement again, and it's going to allow us to walk, idle, and so on. So if we go in and we hit play, we can run around, we can hit H, and you're going to see that, boom, right? So right whenever our hurt animation finishes, we're going to signal that signal, and we're going to say, okay, the hurt animation finished, let's change that back to false, that variable back to false. And everything should come together just like so, which is perfect. Okay, so I know that we kept this section very simple, and the animations that we created, again, are very simple animations, and it took a long time to do it. Well, the whole point of this section is to hopefully get you used to using the animation player and kind of understand how the animation player works here in Godot. Now, hopefully you're on a roll and everything's starting to come to you, like you're saying, oh, well, now we're about to have to add a keyframe here to do this, or have to do this. Hopefully that's how you're starting to think. But if not, and you are confused at any part of this tutorial so far, let me know in the comments, because as we move into other parts of this tutorial, I don't want you to get lost and confused and kind of give up on the animation player, because if you really know how to use it, then it's so useful and it'll benefit you so many different instances. But yeah, so we're going to move into the next part of this tutorial now, which is where we're going to create scene animations, and we're going to create a transition between our world and our fire world, and a transition out of it, and then kind of have like some cool little animation inside of our world as well. So hopefully you're getting the hang of everything, and let's move into that right now and get started there. Okay, so to actually get started creating our environmental effect animations, we can head on over to our world scene here. And let's first of all talk about what we're going to do. So of course we're going to have an animation that plays when we're in the world scene, and then we're going to have a separate animation which plays when we're in the fire scene. But to get between those two animations, to make that smooth, we're going to have to go over transition animations as well. So that's one of the things we're going to go over in this section is transition animations. We're also going to go over the method track. We're going to talk about the audio track and a few other things. So this is going to be a good section for kind of expanding our knowledge on the animation player, and again, improving our skills by working with the animation player. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in an animation player within our environmental zones node, because we want to try and keep our project as organized as possible. So we can add in an animation player here within our environmental zones, and this is basically going to control what you see right here. And we're also going to end up controlling the void color with it, but that's going to be okay. So we can hop into our animation player and we can create our very first animation. Maybe this animation can be for our fire world. So we'll create that one first because I assume it'll be the more complex animation, but again, still a very simple animation. So we can say fire. This is going to be what we play when we're within our fire world. And again, we have to think about, well, what do we want to happen? Well, maybe let's first of all think about how we want our player to take damage. So when our player is in the fire area, maybe we want our player to take damage every 3 seconds, right? So, okay, let's change our animation duration to 3 seconds. And then we can add in a method track that sends a method to our player to take damage at a certain keyframe, right? So maybe we want that to happen at the very beginning of our animation. So the moment we hit the fire, we take damage, and then every 3 seconds, whenever our animation loops back around, we're going to take damage again. So we can say add track. This is going to be a call method track, and then we can call the method of our player here, and we can insert a keyframe. When we insert a keyframe, it's going to allow us to choose any method that is within our player that we want to call. So for example, we want to call our process damage method, which is right there. Perfect. And then we can bring this to the very beginning of our animation, and we can click on this keyframe here, go over to inspector, come down to arguments, and then we can extend the argument. So we know that, of course, it's not going to say right here what argument, or I mean, it says, I guess, one argument count, but there's no set argument here. You can't just type in a value. You actually have to know what the argument is that you're passing through. So for us, it's damage, which in this case is going to be an integer. So we can say, okay, well, the type that we're passing through is going to be an integer. And the value that we want to pass through, maybe every 3 seconds, we want our player to take 10 damage, right? So we're going to pass through 10 into our process damage function. So if we go back to our player, we have the process damage, and basically it's going to pass through the number 10 through here each time, and that's going to subtract that from our health. So every 3 seconds now, whenever we're playing this fire animation, every time we loop back around, every 3 seconds, we're going to process damage. We're going to call that method. We can hit loop on this animation, of course, because we need it to loop while we're in the fire zone. And then maybe we can add some more environmental effects, like the atmosphere color changing or the void color turning to some sort of color. So in this animation, we're not going to actually change those things. Instead, we're just going to kind of set them, because we're going to change that whenever we create our transition animation, which we'll go over in a minute. But for example, if we want the void to be dark red, we can say, okay, let's add a property track of our void color, and then we need to add the color property, right? And then we can, I guess we can manually keyframe this up here. Maybe instead of this blue, this fancy blue here, we can change this. I'm going to actually copy this color just so we don't lose that blue. But maybe we can change it to pretty red, right? Move all these down to 0. So that's a dark red there. And that looks pretty good for a void color. That looks like a dark red, which kind of looks a little scary there. And then we can say, okay, that's what the color we want. So we can keyframe that at the very beginning. And then again, this is a looping animation. So what's going to happen is when we play, the background color is going to be this dark red, and then we're also going to process damage every single time our animation loops back around. Perfect. Maybe we want our atmosphere color to make some sort of throbbing color, like some sort of flash, and we can get it dark, or it can be its darkest whenever we're taking damage. So how are we going to do that? Well, that's going to be a property track of our atmosphere color. So we can come to our atmosphere color and we can say, okay, we're in the fire zone, so we don't need this to be transparent because it's going to go from transparent to red whenever we're doing our transition animation. So right now we're already in the fire zone. This is what we want when we're in the deepest parts of the fire zone, right? So maybe we want it to be the darkest. We want it to be red, of course, and then maybe we want it to be the darkest whenever we are, maybe we want it to be the darkest at the very beginning whenever we're processing damage. So we can set A to something pretty visible, right? That's very dark. And then we can come over here to the keyframe 0 or 0 seconds, keyframe that value within that animation. we can come down here to maybe halfway through the animation, and we can keyframe a lighter value. We can just change the A value here, maybe by about 40, and then we can keyframe that as well. Maybe even more. That doesn't look like it's too big of a change. Maybe we'll even go to like 105, and then we can come all the way down here, keyframe this value at the very end of our animation, right? And then we can change this value up to a darker color, which is going to be 175A, which looks good. And then now if we play our animation, this is kind of what we see. We can hide these collisions just for now, but you can see that we do kind of have a throbbing red color. And then every single time we get to the darkest point, we're processing that damage. Now, remember what we went over a while back about the different looping over here? If we hit this button here, it's going to loop back and forth, right? So it's going to hit the end and then it's going to go back, which is going to make this a 6-second loop. So if we want to take damage every 3 seconds, well, there's something that maybe if you see it, maybe you don't. But this keyframe here and this keyframe here are the exact same. And they're also the exact same distance apart, which means we can literally, to get the exact same effect, we can cut this to 1.5, delete this keyframe here, and then leave it as the back and forth mode. And then we're going to have that 3-second loop to take damage, right? It's going to 1.5 seconds here, 1.5 seconds back. And then we're also going to do the exact same throbbing in the exact same amount of time, right? So that looks good for a little fire animation. I like that. So let's go and create a new animation. Whoops. Let's rename this to our world animation. This is just going to be for our basic world animation. And we can set our world animation void color to equal to that blue, right? So this is that blue color. So we can make sure it's set to that at the beginning. And then we can also make sure our atmosphere color here is set to invisible, or set to transparent. So basically now we have our two animations here. If we go to our animation player and we kind of play in between these, this is what it's going to look like when we're in our fire world. And then this is what it's going to look like whenever we are in our world, just our normal world. And we can put that on a loop as well, just to make sure. So that's our world, and then that's our fire. So let's implement this into our game, and then we're going to come back and work on transition animations to make a smooth transition between these two different environments, right? So we can hop into our environmental zones here. And first things first, we need to get our animation player so that we can call it. So we can say, okay, well, on ready var animation player. Whoops, I cannot spell, but animation player, which is going to be an animation player, of course, and it's going to be equal to, I guess, just animation player. Yeah, it's not under any special parent or anything, so just animation player. And then we can come down here. This is when we're changing zones. So basically, if the updated zone, which is the new zone, is not equal to the previous zone, then we're going to end up updating the zone. So we can basically say when we print current zone, that's basically the zone that we're in. So instead of doing that, we can just say, okay, well, our animation player dot play whatever our current zone is here, right? So it's going to switch the animation every time we switch the updated zone, which means we've just switched zones. And if we just switch zones, that means we need to update the animation. So if we hop into our world now, okay, we're going to have a little bit of an error there because our animation player over here, if we go to our animation tab, you're going to see that we have a reset tab here. This reset tab is going to be what's basically the default whenever nothing's being played. So to fix that, we can just remove both of these, right? So we don't have a set default. We can go to our animation color, reset that to invisible, and then go to our void here and set that back to that blue color. And then if we go and click play, you're going to see that, well, this is our world. We could also have called the world animation off of within a ready function, which would have done the same, but probably, I guess, would have been better. But you can see that if we walk into the fire, well, we start running around in our fire, and you can see that we take damage every 3 seconds, which is perfect. I'm not clicking any button or doing any special thing to take damage. It's just happening because we're calling that method through the fire animation. If we make it back into the world, you see that we switch back into our world, back into our fire. We are playing that fire animation, and you can kind of see that throbbing color right there as well, which is perfect. So again, this is a very not smooth animation. So to make that smooth, let's go over transition animations. And I mean, there's nothing special about a transition animation other than it's just an animation that we're going to play in between those other two animations, right? So we can create a new animation for this, and we can maybe call it, well, from our world animation to our fire animation, right? Because we're transitioning from our world to our fire. What do we need to be happening within a world to fire animation? Well, our void color is going to start off this sky blue, right? Because we're coming from our world and then we're going to our fire. Our atmosphere color is going to start off transparent, right? Because we're in our world. By the end of this animation, maybe we can make it a little bit shorter, like 0.5. And remember, this is not going to be a loop animation because it's going to be, we're going to call it once and then we're going to switch our animation into, in this case, we would switch it to our fire animation once this finishes. But we'd go from this void color and then we'd go to whatever color we have over here in our fire, which we can just come and copy this color code, go back into our world to fire animation, add in a keyframe for our void over here at the very end, and set that to that red color. And you're going to see that the transition between would look like that, and it's going to kind of transition there just like we need it to. Now, whenever we start our fire animation, we have our atmosphere color equal to this. So to make that as smooth as possible, we can grab this color code. Because this is the start, we can have the end of our world to fire equal to that, because, well, if we were to think about this as a complete timeline, right at this 0.5 of a second, we're going to end up having whatever we have right here at the beginning of our fire animation, because that's exactly what we're going to be playing right after this animation. Like the moment this animation finishes, we're going to start playing our fire animation. So we can say, okay, well, our atmosphere color, we need it to equal to that. And then our transition from world to fire is going to look like this. And then right after that finishes, we're going to go straight into our world. Right straight into our fire animation. And hopefully that's going to allow everything to come together a little bit smoother. Hopefully that makes sense. But then again, we're also going to have a way to get out of our fire world and back into our normal world. So to do that, we can say, okay, well, fire to world. And we can create this animation. Maybe we can have it half a second, just like we had the world to fire. And well, we're basically going to do the exact opposite. So we can take this atmosphere color here. And then by the end of this, we can go back to whatever our perfect blue color was. We can go back to our world animation here to grab this. Back into our fire to world. And we can keyframe this at the very end, right? This blue, just like so. And then down here, we want our atmosphere color to fade into a transparent, again, just like that. So that's going to be from our fire to our world. And this right here is looking good. So now, of course, we have to implement these new transitions within our script. And to do that, we can kind of play around with our code and see what we can do. So if updated zone is not equal to current zone, basically meaning that our old zone and our new zone are two different zones, meaning that we are in a new zone, then we're going to update our current zone to whatever that new zone is. So now we're fully integrated within our new zone. And to do that, well, we can play a transition function right before this. We can say animation player, right? Animation player dot play. And then we can create an animation name. So we can say current zone, which is basically our old zone right here, to our updated zone, which is our new zone. And if you look at these down here, if we're coming from our fire to our world, where our current zone is our old, so that would be fire, then we're going to add that in between underscore to underscore. And then we're going to have our updated zone, which in this case, if we're moving from our fire to our world, our updated zone would be the world. So we're going to end up playing fire underscore to underscore world, which is exactly what our animations are called. So that's perfect, right? And then we can create this as an else if now. So we can say else if our updated zone is equal to the current zone, meaning, for example, we're in our world and we're in our world for the new zone, which means we're not changing zones. We're still in the exact same zone. Then we can say, okay, well, let's check if the animation player is playing that animation already. So if the animation player dot current animation is not equal to the current zone, right? So if we're in our world, then if the animation isn't equal to world, then of course, okay, well shoot, we have a problem there. So we need to update our animation player to play whatever current zone that we are in, if that makes sense. And we only want to do this if our animation player is not playing, right? Because if we're playing, then we don't want to have to cut off our update animation up here. So we can say, okay, well, if the animation player dot playing is equal to false, then we can call this right here, which is perfect. And again, the reason why we're doing this is because if we're playing this and we're in the middle of playing this, then we don't want to be calling this. So we're making sure that this animation is done playing before we end up calling whatever our current zone is equal to, right? So if we go and click play in our world, we're going to, it looks like, get an error there. Okay, so we just said dot playing, but the actual function is dot is playing, just like that. And now we can see that we can run around. All of our player animations work perfect. If we run into the fire, we fade into the fire animation. We take damage every 3 seconds. Perfect, right? A little game mechanic there. And then we go back into the world. We fade back into the world. Now, one thing I want to mention that I just noticed is that when we go into the fire, it kind of flashes white. And it kind of shows like a white effect. And I'm assuming that if we go back to our animation player within our world to fire, that this is coming from white to red, and that's exactly what's happening. So if we go look at our animation player and we kind of go through this animation, you're going to see that everything's going to get white before it gets red, like right there. That's super white, and the reason is because this color is becoming non-transparent, but it's a white non-transparent instead of that red. So if we were to come over here and copy this and then paste this key, we can delete this original key, move this red back to the beginning, and just set this red color to transparent instead of setting that white color to transparent. Now if we were to play and we can run around, we run into the fire zone, you're going to see that looks a lot more smooth, which is perfect. Okay, so I think that's going to bring this section of the video to a close as we went over different animations for the different areas of our world. We went over transition animations, and we also went over the call method track to create this little in-game feature of our player taking damage, which is amazing. Remember, if you're having any questions up to this point in the tutorial, be sure to let me know in the comments so I can help you out so that you're not confused as we move into UI animation. But we're going to move into UI animation right now and start working with animating the UI, and we're going to be able to display our player health up here in our corner and create a little taking damage effect whenever we lose health, which is going to be fun to do. So let's move into that now and create UI animations with the animation player. So to get started with animating UI, we of course need some sort of UI to animate. Now I'm going to go ahead and create the UI in a quick time lapse, just as it can be time consuming and it doesn't really relate directly to the animation player. But if you did want to check out a tutorial on UI specifically, then I'll link one down below. In this tutorial, we're going to keep the animation of UI kind of simple because to really animate UI, you must have a good understanding of how containers work and alignment of control nodes and so on. But again, I'll link that tutorial down below that covers UI completely, from control nodes to alignment to animating and everything. And the reason for this is because I want this video to focus on specifically the animation player, while that video focuses on UI, control nodes, alignment, and animating UI and sorts of things that are related more to UI. Also, if you see that player variable up at the top of the script that we're writing now, that is a absolute horrible way to access the player, and make sure you don't do that in your own projects. I regret that I did that in this project, but I wanted to inform you, like, don't do it that way, because if we move the player node, then we're going to have a total bug and everything's going to go wrong. So just make sure that you get that player scene correctly and not just through the node tree like that. Okay, so now that we have UI, let's work on animating it. So we're going to head on over to our main user interface scene here, and inside our right under our main control node, we can add in an animation player, which is going to basically store all of our animations for our UI, right? So just like we have that animation player in the world, we have one on the player, we're going to have one for our UI specifically, again, just to keep all of our animations organized. Now we're going to create a brand new animation. The animation that we're going to work with is going to be an animation for if we change health, you know, so we can call it health change. If there's a change in health, then we're going to play this animation. Okay, again, so we need to think about what we actually want for this animation. Well, let's have it maybe scale up really quick, kind of like it's like popping out of the screen, and then maybe we can have the heart shed hearts off of it, like one comes out this way, one comes out this way. And we'll stick with that for now, but if we think that if something else comes to mind, we can always come back and work on adding it in. So let's first add the scale, because that's going to be the easiest. We can go to we have to kind of look at our hierarchy up here and see what do we need to scale for the entire system here to scale. Well, we need to scale something that's above the 9 patch rect. We don't want to scale our main scene, so now that we see that, we can say, okay, well, let's add in a new control node. Let's name this control node, for example, our player health UI. And then we can move that 9 patch rect into this player health UI. Now, if we change the scale on this player health UI here, you're going to see that, where's the scale? Right here. Maybe we go to 1.1. It's going to increase size of the entire UI piece. So that's good. So now we know that, okay, we need to animate the scale of our player health UI up here. So to do that, well, we can set the scale back to 1, keyframe that at the very beginning of our animation, maybe not too far in our animation, maybe we can go 0.1 of a second in, and then we can keyframe a bigger scale, maybe 1.2, and then we can come to, I'm not sure, maybe 0.3, and we can scale it back down to its original size there, and we can keyframe that. So this is what it will look like. That looks good. And again, remember, this is our camera window, so this is what the screen will look like. And that does not look bad at all. So that's good. Now, that's the scaling part of our animation. But now let's start talking about, well, how are we going to have hearts that shed off of this main heart? Well, of course, we're going to have some sort of other node which stores the texture for those hearts. And then we have to change the position. We're going to have to change the rotation. Maybe we can have it fade in and fade out. So how do we go about that? Well, first of all, we have to have a heart. We want that heart to scale at the same scale that, well, our entire system here scales. So we need that heart to be within our player health UI. So we can just add a simple sprite 2D. And we can, instead of for the texture, we can use an atlas texture here. And the reason that we have to use an atlas texture is because our heart is within a bigger sprite sheet here, right? So if we use an atlas texture, then we can drag this into this texture. Oh, whoops. We can open up this atlas texture and then drag this into our atlas texture there. And then we can edit the region of our texture, which is the beauty of an atlas texture. So then we can kind of just grab this heart here, which is going to be perfect, right? Something like that is good. Hit close, and then we're going to have our heart. Now that is a very big heart. So we can come down and set the default scale of this heart to something much smaller. That looks good. And again, if we are to scale this entire thing here, that heart is going to scale with it, right? Because it's under it. It's a child of it. So if we go 1.5, you're going to see that heart there also is going to scale, which is perfect. So if we play this animation, well, the heart and everything is going to scale with it, and it's not going to come out to look funny or unpositioned or something like that. So we can move this heart now to a position that we think it looks good at, right? So maybe we can start it right here. We can now go and keyframe this heart, or let's first give it a name. Let's name this one heart 1. We can keyframe this position, the starting position there. And then maybe by the time we get to 0.3, we can give it a good amount of time there. We can have some movement. So of course we need the X to go negative, right? Or not, I guess not negative, but we need it to go down. So maybe we can subtract it by 20, and then you're going to see it kind of move there to the left. And then we also need the Y to decrease, because we need the heart to kind of look like it's floating up and away. So maybe we can decrease that by 20 as well. Maybe we can actually do X by not 20 but instead 10, so it doesn't look too crazy there. And then we can keyframe this position. So now that's going to look like the heart is kind of shedding up and away. And then maybe by the time we get to 0.6 down here, we can have it move even more away, right? So maybe we can have it move farther away on the X axis, and then we can also have it move farther up into the air as well, and then we can keyframe that as well. Now to make this heart actually look like it's kind of like coming up and away from that main heart there, we can add some rotation to it, right? Because this looks good, but it looks like it's just kind of floating like a balloon or a bubble, which might not be the preferred look. And I like to do a little bit of rotation because I think it makes the heart look like it's actually moving. So we can rotate it at 0, 0 at the very beginning. By the time we get to 0.3, maybe we can have like a 30% rotation. Since we're moving to the left, if we rotate it to the left, it makes it look more natural, I guess you could say. So we're going to have our hearts, since it's moving to the left on the x-axis, we're going to have it rotate to the left, which means we're going to rotate it negative. So we can go to negative 30 there. And then by the time we get to 0.6 over here, we can have it go all the way like to, I don't know, negative 80, right? And then see how that looks. Oops, we forgot to keyframe the negative 80 over here. So let's make sure we keyframe negative 80. Negative 80, keyframe that. There we go. And then we can see kind of what happens there. Heart goes away and it kind of rotates away. And then we also mentioned it fading in and out, so we can do that. We can keyframe invisible here. So we can make sure that this is invisible, keyframe that. And then maybe really early on into our animation, like maybe even around right here, we can keyframe that as visible, right? So it's going to fade in there. And then we can have it kind of start to fade out around maybe here, right? So by the time we get to 0.6, if we're going to have 0.6 as the end of our animation, we can have this go back to invisible there. And we can kind of look at how this looks. Maybe we even need it to fade just a little bit more, right? So maybe we can go at 0.3, we can have it start fading out there. And that actually looks pretty neat. So I like the way that looks. We're going to change the duration of our animation to 0.6 since that's where our last keyframe is. But overall, I think that looks pretty smooth and I like the way that that's came out, right? And then again, we can add in another heart. And because it's the exact same process, we can move through it a little bit quicker. And maybe you can try and do it on your own. But instead of it going to the left side here, let's try and make it go up and to the right, just so we can have two hearts going in two different directions. I'm going to do mine in time lapse just to save us a bit of time, but you pause the video and you try and implement it yourself, and then we'll meet up right in like 30 seconds. So let's implement our second heart. Okay, so here's how our animation has came out. and that looks pretty neat. Our animation has came together wonderfully. I really like the way it looks. Now the only thing we have to do is get it implemented into our script. So we can head into our script here, and I mean, all we have to really do is call the animation when we update our text, right? So right here, we're going to say, okay, well, our player health text is not equal to what our player health text should be. So then we update our player health text, and when we update our player health text, then that means we need to play the animation, right? Because we are changing the health that is being displayed. So we can say, okay, well, animation player dot play, and then we can call that animation, which is health changed. And if we were to go to our world, make sure our UI is there, perfect, and then we play the game, we're going to instantly get an error, which of course is not good, but let's see what's going on here. Okay, so what's going on is whenever we added this new control node up here, we forgot to update our path right here. So yeah, we can just remove all of this right here and then drag in our new path. Whoops, not that. We need to drag in our path for our amount text way down here, just like that. And then if we were to go back to the world now and play our scene, everything now should come together perfectly. Okay, so we have our UI. Let's run around into the lava area, and we're gonna get another error. So that's not good. So let's go figure out what's going on now. Well, that's I guess another silly error. We just have .x here. That needs to be text, right? Just like we had up here. Okay, now third time's a charm, right? That's what they say. Let's run into our fire area, see what happens. And then boom, we're gonna take damage every 3 seconds, and then we're going to play that animation on our UI there. And that looks pretty neat. I do like the way that that turned out actually a lot. And we can again escape the fire, come over here, run around, have all of our little player animations, have our world animation, we have our transition animations. Everything is coming together perfectly. And we went from a project which was so bare bones, and now we have a project which actually has a little bit of character. And we did it, well, it took a while, but we now hopefully have a better understanding of the animation player, and we did it all through the animation player, right? So we got a lot of practice with it, and I recommend you to keep continuing to work on the animation player and create many projects with it, because when you really get to know the animation player and understand how to use it, it is so beneficial. And I know we kept this tutorial to the very basic, the most simple uses of the animation player, but trust me, the animation player is one of the most powerful nodes in Godot, and if you really learn how to use it, it'll benefit you in so many different instances. So play with it, learn about it, and use it to your advantage. If you have any questions, simple or complex, let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was a beneficial tutorial, or at least it shed some light on the animation player node in Godot, because it truly is an amazing node. But until next time, stay safe and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. God bless, and bye-bye.